Hello, this is Mr. Hickey from Boreham Comprehensive School, and this is my lesson on the Eucharistic Congress of 1932. Now, first things first, I suppose I have to say this lesson is probably going to be quite long because I'm going to go into the Congress in a lot of detail, not just the events of the week itself, but what preceded it in terms of church and state and the connection between them, and what went on afterwards as well. Because the reason I would do that is, I suppose, the worst thing a student can do is just focus on the case study. Just study the events of the week, Monday right through Sunday, and think the job is done. It's not. At higher level, especially, you have to be, you have to understand the bigger picture. In other words, what was going on in Ireland before, during, and after the Congress. Now, the other advice I would give you before you watch this video is from time to time, pause and stop and the video. Give yourself time to take down the notes and to also take in what we're talking about. All right, so let's begin. Now, that word again, duopoly. Again, it was a term I focused on in a previous video. This idea of two organizations, two groups sharing power. Now, here I say the Eucharistic Congress was proof of the growing duopoly of power that came to exist in the early years of the Free State. It was also the high point of Catholic nationalism and triumphalism in this country. Now, as I said previously, I'm going to start well before the Congress itself and have a look at the relationship between church and state. And we'll start with 1922. From 1922, the Catholic Church had become very influential in the running of the state. The moral panic it created around issues like sexuality and alcohol were very much taken on board by Irish governments. This can be seen, first of all, in the following laws introduced by Common Nail. Many of these laws were introduced to govern moral and sexual behaviour. They included 1923, the Censorship of Films Act. This was actually one of the first pieces of legislation passed by the Free State, and it would set the tone for decades to come when it came to the kinds of films Irish people could watch on their cinemas and TV. James Montgomery was Ireland's first censor. He summed up his qualifications for the job when he famously stated he knew nothing about films, but he knew the Ten Commandments. And I suppose this gives us a great idea of the kind of mindset the Irish film censor had. In other words, if something wasn't holy or moral, or if it wasn't those things, it would not get past him as a censor and would not be shown in Irish cinemas. No, he really tore into his job. In his first full year as censor, he banned over 100 films and cut scenes from another 200. His successes until the 1980s were little better, banning and cutting films according to zealous Catholic standards. On alcohol, the number of pubs and opening hours were also significantly reduced. And of course, this was much to the pleasure and satisfaction of the Catholic Church. The so-called Holy Hour was introduced, where pubs used to close between the hours of 2 and 4 p.m. on Sunday afternoons. And again, I suppose the Catholic Church was happy with that, in that rather than focusing on time in the pub, Irish people were at home focusing on their religion. In 1925, divorce was banned in Ireland, despite the objections of Protestants, including W.B. Yeats. 1929 saw the Censorship of Literature Act. Catholic campaigners in the 20s wanted a similar shutdown, as we saw in film, on evil literature that was seen to be contaminating Holy Ireland. This banned the sale of any literature that was deemed immoral or obscene, including information about contraception. The mere suggestion of homosexuality, promiscuity, or prostitution was enough to ban a book. Now, have a look at this list of great Irish writers. What have they all got in common? Shaw, Beckett, Joyce, O'Casey, and Brendan Behan. Did you get it? Get it? Yeah. At one time or another, they or their books or pieces of work were banned in Ireland. Now, such measures, I suppose, mainly when it came to censorship, made Ireland culturally conservative. It also stifled or restricted creativity, free speech, and diversity. Another indication of church influence was the fact that Cum had no problem with the church running and expanding the industrial school system. Now, what kind of children ended up in these industrial schools? Well, I suppose you're talking about children who maybe had fallen into a life of crime, who came from broken homes, um, children like that. Now, these industrial schools were run by the Catholic Church mainly. And by 1924, there were more children in Irish industrial schools than England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland combined. Okay, so the Free State government was quite prepared, to give up its responsibility in terms of looking after the children of the state and providing for them, and handing that responsibility to the Catholic Church. Indeed, the industrial school system would expand and get bigger through the decades. I suppose it's interesting when you think that in England, the practice was ended in 1933. That was not the case in Ireland, much to the detriment of many of these children. Now, overseeing all of this was the very Catholic W.T. Cosgrave, who even had a private chapel in his house for masses. However, Cosgrave tried to assure the Protestant community. For instance, he appointed 24 Protestants to the Irish Senate, including W.B. Yeats. Another example of Cosgrave's fair-mindedness to Protestants was his decision to dissolve Mayo County Council after it refused to ratify the appointment of a Protestant to the position of county librarian. However, Protestant numbers continued to decline in the Free State. When the Free State was created, they numbered 7% of the population. By the 1940s, this had almost halved to just 4%. Why? Why are Protestants leaving Ireland? Well, firstly, the terror directed against them during the Civil War and War of Independence. Secondly, they saw the dominance of the Catholic Church and they felt like a marginalised community. Thirdly, they didn't feel welcome. Their identity was at odds with the Gaelic and Catholic identity that was being promoted mainly by the government. So, this now brings us to the high point of Catholic nationalism and triumphalism in Ireland, the 1932 Eucharistic Congress. And of course, this is one of the three Leaving Cert case studies. Again, I have here some images from the Congress. I believe this is a postcard from the time. Again, I picked this picture because it gives you a sense of the crowds that turned out. And hopefully, as you'll see, in terms of organisation, what had to be done to organise a successful Congress. This was a big deal. We have here Cardinal Lauri and his arrival in Dublin at the start of the Congress. And here he is flanked by Eamon de Valera, the President of the Executive Council. More about that later. Now, the EC, and again, when you're writing essays or questions, again, I would recommend the first time you write the term Eucharistic Congress, write it fully. From that point on, EC, Eucharistic Congress is fine. And again, it's a way of saving time. So, what I'm saying here is the Eucharistic Congress was the greatest proof of the close links right? These guys here, the close links between the Catholic Church and the state. It also shows the increasing power of the Catholic Church. Plus, it was an ideal way for the southern state to identify itself to the world as a Catholic country. Now, what are Eucharistic Congresses? Well, they are mass events, no pun intended, mass in terms of huge, big, that are held to celebrate the Eucharist. Typically, it sees thousands of church leaders and ordinary Catholics gather for open air masses and adoration of the Eucharist. Now, 1932 wasn't the only time Ireland hosted the Eucharistic Congress. We also held the event in 2012. Now, this was the 31st International Eucharist, and it was held in Dublin from the 21st to the 26th of June 1932. For 6 days, Ireland and the city of Dublin would be the centre of the Catholic world. Now, it was held in Ireland to mark a very important anniversary, right? It is widely believed that St. Patrick arrived in Ireland in 432, and with him he brought Christianity. So 1932 was the 1500th anniversary of St. Patrick's arrival. Now, at this point, I would ask you maybe to leave this video and have a look at this excellent clip. Now, I will include it in the comments or the notes below the video. But basically, we have this lovely lady here who, at the time of the Congress, was a child, and she talks about the Congress, so she's a brilliant primary source. It also includes footage from the Congress, and I think it gives you a real feel for what the Congress was about and the excitement and interest it generated across the country. Okay, and it's just 8 minutes long. So again, go to the comments or the notes below the video for the link to this video. It is well worth watching. So now that you've watched that, what I want to focus on now is how the Free State governments, now that's not a mistake, governments as in plural, I want to look at the two governments of Cosgrave and De Valera and how they responded to organising the Eucharistic Congress. Now, for both men, it was extremely important. Both wanted to impress the Catholic Church and show the world Ireland was a Catholic country. For Dev, it was very important. In 1932, he'd only just taken power. His relationship with the church was not always a good one. He'd actually been excommunicated for his part in the Irish Civil War. His coming to power alarmed many Catholics. Would he now take his revenge on the church? Would Ireland become more secular? Would he reduce church influence? Well, you know what? There was no fear. And the Eucharistic Congress was proof of that. He used it as the perfect opportunity to show his full support for the Catholic Church. For example, he maintained the previous government's commitment for the Congress. He took a high-profile part in the main events of the Eucharistic Congress. So, for example, he was there to greet Cardinal Lauri in person when he arrived, and he attended all the major masses held in the course of the week. Actually, here's a picture of Dev here on the right. In the middle, we have Cardinal Lauri, and here too, as he was then the president of Blackrock College, later to be Archbishop of Dublin, John Charles McQuaid. Again, both Dev and he were close and friendly, and McQuaid would have had a lot of influence on Dev over the years. Now, let's look at preparations for the Congress. And again, I'm going to look at two things here. I'm going to look at the government's preparations and the preparations of ordinary Irish people. Now, the government's efforts. Well, you have to begin at the beginning. It was Cosgrave who lobbied. Lobbied is another word for convinced the Vatican to host the Congress in Ireland. So again, straight away you can see the Free State government jumping into this thing and helping to organise it. Normally you'd expect this would be the responsibility of the Catholic Church to convince the Vatican to bring it to Ireland. But no, here we have W.T. Cosgrave, President of the Executive Council, leader of the Irish government, lobbying the Vatican to host the Congress. Can we please have the Congress in Ireland? And of course, eventually he got the green light, which he was happy about, I'm sure. Now, to facilitate the smooth running of the Eucharistic Congress, Cosgrave even brought forward the 1932 general election to February, so it would not clash with the Congress in June. The election itself was due to be held in June, but Cosgrave, being the good Catholic he was, and again, prioritising the Eucharistic Congress ahead of his own political career, said, let's have the general election in February. Now, we should know the result of that. He lost the election. Devon Fianna Fáil came to power. So when the Congress actually does take place, it's not Cosgrave that's there to meet Lauri, it's Eamon de Valera. Now, as you'll see, probably you know already, the Congress was a tremendous success. It really helped to showcase Ireland and, really make Irish people feel good about being Irish and not just being Catholic. But the theory goes that if Cosgrave had actually waited till after the Congress, the feel-good factor may have helped his party win the general election. But look, that didn't happen. Other measures by Cosgrave, the Gardaí, the Irish Army, were put at the Congress's disposal to ensure its success. So no great division of church and state there. The Garda Commissioner was put in charge of the day-to-day logistics of the Eucharistic Congress. So again, that would be hard to imagine today that the current Garda Commissioner would be actually asked to forget crime and law and order, just focus on this one thing and organise it. But that's what Cosgrave did. Special legislation was also enacted. It was passed by the Dáil. It was called the Eucharistic Congress Act of 1932. This made provision for special traffic control regulations. Again, considering the crowds that would be converging on Dublin, traffic had to be controlled. Again, to cater for those crowds, special exemptions were put in place for hotels and restaurants in the Dublin area. Again, all to cater for the different pilgrims coming to the Congress. Now, money had to be spent on the Congress, and it was, despite the protests from J.J. McElligott, head of the Department of Finance, a man we met before, and a man we know who was obsessed with balancing the books. However, both Cosgrave and Dave were quite prepared to flash the cash, to spend the money on the Congress. So money was spent on, I suppose, such luxuries as spectacular lighting effects, skywriting, creating the largest public address system in the world, and even setting up a radio station, Radio Athlone, for the Congress. Now, on Radio Athlone, which would later become RTE, or Radio Éireann, this covered the Eucharistic Congress, so people all over the country could tune in. And if you didn't have a radio, people were encouraged to go to neighbours' houses and listen there. So as you can see, no effort or expense was to be spared in the country's efforts to impress Cardinal Lauri. Dublin underwent a dramatic makeover. Major buildings in the cities like the GPO were lit up at night by a series of powerful spotlights and coloured lamps. A number of large, temporary, but impressive structures were erected for the Eucharistic Congress, including a round tower, as you can see in this picture, which I believe is near College Green in Dublin. Now, I suppose then, as now, accommodation was a problem in Dublin. Um, so, how would Dublin cater for all these pilgrims coming to Dublin? How would they accommodate them? In other words, how would they put a roof over their heads? Well, large camps were established in Cabra and Artane to house the pilgrims. Emergency accommodation was also provided in numerous national schools and even library buildings in the greater Dublin area. For many of those who travelled from abroad, particularly from America, the shipliners in which they travelled, served as floating hotels. So, some good thinking there. Now, let's have a look at ordinary people's preparations. Now, I suppose it has to be said the vast majority of ordinary people in Ireland embraced the Eucharistic Congress and were determined to put the best foot forward for the event. Resident associations around Dublin ensured that every major street in the capital would be decorated with flags, particularly Vatican flags. As you can see, these two men here are putting them up here on a lamppost. And bunting. Bunting was big. As you can see here, this street was strewn with it. And I've read somewhere that actually 12 miles of bunting was put up in Dublin alone to mark the Eucharistic Congress. Wow. Again, pictures a little bit blurry, but what you have here are one of the many shrines that were put up on or erected in different streets around Dublin, and not just Dublin, all over the country. People went to a tremendous effort to mark the Congress. So this shrine was put up in many of the tenements, the poorest areas of the city of Dublin. And I suppose you can see as well, like, the sacrifices people made, that people would prefer to spend money on a holy statue or a candle rather than food. And this was something that commentators picked up at the time. I suppose what I mean by commentators are journalists and writers who commented on the Congress, that the tenements, the poorest parts of Dublin, were often the most impressively decorated. Take this example here. I think it's brilliant. It's a coloured picture. Again, just to show the efforts this rather large family, went to mark the Congress. So you can see pictures, statues, and of course some bunting also. Obviously, they are very excited about the Congress. One journalist described Dublin as a city of a million flames because at night, Dubliners were encouraged to put a candle in the window to mark the Congress. So after all that, let's begin the actual Congress itself. Well, it all took place in June 1932, and sources tell me that actually the country was blessed. The weather for it was perfect. So someone was looking after the Congress that week. Pilgrims, bishops, and cardinals from as far as China, Australia, Africa, and the United States arrived to mark the Congress. Now, on Monday, June 20th, the Congress begins. At Dun Laoghaire Port, senior members of the civil service and the government, including Dun Laoghaire, waited eagerly for Lauri's arrival by steamer from Holyhead. Now, if you have trouble remembering the name of the cardinal in question, I always use this trick, and again, if it's not obvious from my presentations, I'm very much a visual learner myself, so I put in a lot of pictures and gifs. But the way to remember the cardinal is, say what you see here, what is it? Yeah, it's a Lauri, right? So Cardinal Lauri, he became the focal point of the Eucharistic Congress. Now, what's the spelling now? Lauri, Lauri, was the papal legate. meaning he was the Pope's direct representative. Now, his boat docked on the 20th of June under the cover of a squadron of planes from the Irish Air Force flying in crucifix formation. And again, so I suppose you can see here, and you'll see more of it shortly, of the role the Irish military played in the Congress, particularly when it came to the arrival of Lauri and the different processions. Now, in a previous video, I had looked at what had happened in France in the 1880s, where spectacles like these, the French army showing support for the Catholic Church in terms of processions was totally banned. Here we are 50 years later in Ireland, and that's not the case. The Irish Army, Air Force, the Guards, they play a huge part in the running and organisation of the Congress. So another example of that here. When Lauri arrived, the Irish Army fired a 19-gun artillery salute for him. On arrival, or after his arrival, he travelled in procession the 9 miles from Dun Laoghaire to St. Mary's Pro Cathedral in Dublin, led by these guys here, the Blue Hussars, right? A recently created ceremonial cavalry unit. And they had these very eye-catching blue uniforms created, especially for it as well. Now, the Tuesday of Congress Week, 14,000 people attend a garden party at Blackrock College, where Lauri is the guest of honour. That night, Dev hosts a state banquet in Dublin Castle for the Cardinal. Now, on Wednesday, I suppose officially the Congress opened. The first of the big masses was held in the Pro Cathedral in Dublin. There is its interior. On Thursday, excuse me, I'm doing a lot of talking. Sip of water here. Excuse me. No, sir. On Thursday, the men's mass was held in the Phoenix Park. 250,000 men attended this mass. Wow. And again, you can see an overhead shot of it here. So you can see here the high altar and the people in attendance. Does it remind you of any other case study, in terms of columns, lines, a big stadium, purpose-built for an occasion? Maybe think of the Nuremberg rallies and you get the gist I'm on. Now, Friday, now ask yourself, would more or less women have attended their mass? This was Women's Day, so they had their mass in the Phoenix Park. Yeah, that surprises me. I would have expected more women to be in attendance, but 200,000 women attended the Women's Day Mass in the Phoenix Park. On Saturday was Children's Day. So 100,000 children attend their Mass in the Phoenix Park. So this brings us to the main event, the Sunday, the final day of the Eucharistic Congress, the climax of the whole event. So the high point of the Eucharistic Congress came on the final Sunday with a massive open-air Mass in the Phoenix Park. Elaborate decorations and constructions had transformed the large park, including an ornate altar. Here is a close-up of it here. Now, the government put in place 20,000 volunteer stewards, including 4,000 Boy Scouts, to ensure the smooth running of the Congress, all under the guidance of Garda Commissioner Owen O'Duffy. For the Mass and for the events in the Phoenix Park, the largest PA, or public address system, then in existence was put in place. 500 speakers were set up, because the people there wanted to hear 3 things. Firstly, a special broadcast from Pope Pius XI. And again, I suppose this was greeted with considerable excitement because I suppose at that time Catholic popes tended to stay in Rome. Okay, you could read their writings. You know, you'd hear plenty about them at sermons, at mass on a Sunday. But to actually hear the Pope's voice, it was an amazing moment for a lot of people. A second thing that needed to be heard was the mass itself, led by Cardinal Lauri. And I suppose a third thing that a lot of people remember hearing at the Sunday Mass was John McCormack's haunting rendition of Panis Angelicus, the Latin, for bread of the angels. This would never be forgotten by those who heard it either in person or on the radio. Now, John McCormack in the 1920s and 30s was a pretty big deal. I suppose he was the Bono of his time, if you've heard of Bono. Maybe he was the Hosier of today, or the Ed Sheeran. But he was a big deal. Um, Again, maybe in the notes below, I will include a YouTube clip of him actually singing the song. But don't wait for that. Check him out on Spotify. Okay? John McCormack, The Definitive Collection. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Now, it is estimated that 1 million people were in attendance at that Mass. Thousands came up from the country by special trains specially laid out for that purpose. And I suppose for a lot of people, it was their first time ever leaving their own county, you know, not to mind going to Dublin, just to be at the Eucharistic Congress. 1 million people, wow. So overall, the Eucharistic Congress was a great success. Lauri himself said, again, this is a great quote, "I shall never forget the unforgettably glorious days of this Eucharistic Congress." He went on, "All have cooperated to make this Congress a triumph. Government and civic leaders, as well as ecclesiastical authorities, priests, and members of religious communities." Now, I suppose what's significant there is what who Lauri highlights as being important in the Congress's success. It was the government, right? And he actually highlighted that first of all in this statement, which I think is very interesting. And again, it again underlines that point of how close the government and the church were in Ireland at this time and would be for decades to come. Now, the Eucharistic Congress is historically important also for the following reasons. It asserted the Free State as a leading Catholic nation. It made Irish Catholics proud to be so. However, the downside, for Protestants, it was a very different story. They felt further isolated. The Congress strengthened the relationship between Dev's new government and the Catholic Church. Remember, Dev didn't always have a good relationship with the Catholic Church. Well, from this point on, there's no fear, as I said before. They are very much on the same page. Therefore, the Eucharistic Congress further strengthened the duopoly of power. I love that word, duopoly. The duopoly of power that existed between the Free State and the Church. The proof of this would be Dev would go on to introduce some notable legislation influenced by the Catholic Church. For example, the 1935 Dance Halls Act. The Church had always been worried about the threat to morality of dances, well, independently run dances and jazz music. They claimed that such gatherings were dens of vice and sex. Well, with the Dance Hall Act, dances now had to be licensed and severely restricted, and more or less needed the permission of the local priest to go ahead. Now, from other reading, I have found out that one of the major consequences of the Dancehall Act was the decline in Irish traditional music happens, because I suppose at a lot of these independently run dances, people just got together. You bring in traditional musicians and they play jigs and reels, and everyone get very sweaty and have a great time and all that, um, that can't happen anymore, because of the Dancehall Act. Also in 1935, the sale of contraceptives were banned. And again, much to be, how would I put it now, a decision that was widely welcomed by the Catholic Church, because of course the Church is big into people getting married, having families, etc. Contraceptives do not help that process, in their eyes anyway. Now, the greatest example of church influence would be 1937, the year Dev introduced Dun Laoghaire, our new constitution. Article 44 of which recognised the special position of the Catholic Church. Now, the Constitution recognised that there were other religions and they were important, but of all these religions, one religion was special, and that was the Catholic Church. Now, another consequence, and I suppose something I'll touch on further in my next video, my final video on the Eucharistic Congress, was it showed the obvious religious differences between the North and South. The Eucharistic Congress confirmed what many Unionists had believed for decades, which was that Irish Home Rule was Rome rule. During the Eucharistic Congress, sectarian attacks on Catholics in the North increased. In fact, buses carrying Catholic pilgrims coming from Northern Ireland to Dublin were attacked and their windows broken. And I suppose another downside to the Eucharistic Congress was it further intensified the them and us mentality on both sides of the border. Therefore, the Congress helped strengthen partition. Now, before I go and finish up, I'm just going to say to you, this is probably the best article you could ever read on the Eucharistic Congress. It's from History Ireland. Again, I will include it in the notes below this video. It is well worth a read. Absolutely, definitely have a look at it. It goes into so much detail, and I suppose, as I've said in other videos, like when it comes to gaining marks, any evidence of outside reading, it helps. It helps so much. So have a look at that. The next video, again, as I said, they do from time to time, and they haven't done so in a while. They've talked about cultural identity and how it developed both north and south. Now, at this point, if you've watched the two videos I've done on the Eucharistic Congress, you are well covered when it comes to the Irish language and how really it failed, our governments failed to get us speaking Irish and establish that as part of our cultural identity. But we do know now that when it came to promoting the Catholic religion, the Free State government was very successful. Now, let's go one step further. So in my next video, and I promise it's going to be a very, very brief one, we will have a look at cultural identity in the North. Because if you can bring into the exam a paragraph or two of material on this, I believe you are sorted for any cultural identity question, right? Because you will have cultural identity North and South covered, you will have the Irish language covered, and also you will have covered how education was used to promote particular cultural identities on both sides of the border as well. All right, lads, that was a long video. Sorry about the coughing during it. I had to take a sip of water, but I hope it was worth it. And again, drive on with your study and revision, and till next time. Okay, bye-bye.